This Menendez case, it always had this like dark fascination to it, right?
For sure.
Wealth and privilege, and then this brutal crime. It hooked the entire nation back then. What's really interesting now is how this potential resentencing hinges on like all this stuff. That wasn't even part of the conversation back in the 90s. Lyle and Erik Menendez, they shot and killed their parents, Jose and Kitty, in their Beverly Hills mansion. And like their defense was that they were terrified that after years of abuse from their father, they thought that their parents were going to kill them to keep them quiet. So the first trial, hung jury, they couldn't agree on a verdict.
So they had to do it all again.
Second trial, boom. Both brothers convicted of first-degree murder.
Wow.
Life in prison. Oh, there's more.
Because now the Los Angeles County District Attorney George Gascón, he's saying, hold on.
What?
Maybe not.
He's reopening the case.
Well, he's not reopening it, but he's recommending resentencing.
Resentencing. Wow, that's huge.
He's suggesting 50 years to life. Which would make them eligible for parole, like, immediately. First, he says that the brothers have been model prisoners for over 3 decades. They're saying that they've shown that they can rehabilitate.
That's interesting. But, I mean, good behavior alone doesn't usually get you a resentencing in a double homicide case.
No, you're absolutely right.
So there has to be more to it. And this is where the new evidence comes in. So we have Roy Rossello.
Roy Rossello?
Yeah.
What's that?
He's a former member of Menudo, that 80s boy band. And he is publicly claiming that he was abused by Jose Menendez when he was a teenager.
So that's pretty significant.
It is. And then there's this letter that Erik wrote detailing the alleged abuse. And Gascón is also bringing up
what's that?
How much our understanding of abuse has evolved since the early 90s. Like back then.
Yeah.
The idea that men could be victims, especially young men, it wasn't really talked about.
It was like a taboo subject.
It was.
Yeah, you just didn't hear those stories. That's a really interesting point. Like, could this have been a genuine act of self-defense? Born out of years of trauma.
It's mind-blowing to consider, Ray.
It really is.
Like, what if all this evidence and, like, our current understanding of abuse had been presented back then?
And sometimes that new knowledge, I think, should force us to re-examine these old cases.
And it's not just the legal system that's grappling with this case.
Yeah.
The family is deeply divided over this potential resentencing. So you've got Kitty Menendez's brother. Milton Anderson, and he's totally against any leniency. He lost his sister. And from his perspective, these guys deserve to be behind bars for life. And then on the other hand, you have some of Kitty's other family members, like her sister, who are actually advocating for the brothers' release. They're saying they believe the abuse claims, they see the impact of that trauma, and they feel like enough time has been served. Then to make things even more complicated,
there's more.
You can't ignore the political storm that's brewing around this whole case.
Oh, yeah. This has definitely become a political issue.
Oh, absolutely. This has become a major battleground in Gascón's re-election bid.
Of course it has.
His opponents are slamming him.
For being soft on crime.
For being soft on crime, saying this sets a dangerous precedent. His supporters are praising him
as a reformer,
as a champion of criminal justice reform, who's willing to look at a complicated case with fresh eyes. So it's this fascinating mix of legal arguments, new evidence evolving societal understanding, family drama,
and political maneuvering,
all converging on this one case.
It's like a perfect storm.
How do we balance the need for punishment with the understanding that people and circumstances can change? It feels like a completely different world, right?
It does, doesn't it?
We talk about these things so much more openly now.
Yeah.
But back then,
it was
just shrouded in secrecy and shame.
Absolutely.
And of course, the prosecutions, they had a very different take. They were pushing this narrative that Lyle and Erik were just greedy, cold-blooded killers who wanted their parents' money. But here's the thing, though. Couldn't that spending spree also fit the abuse narrative?
Oh, that's interesting.
Like maybe they were trying to create this new life for themselves to finally break free from this horrible, oppressive situation. It seems like the juries back then just didn't have the context to even consider that possibility.
That's a really good point.
Right. If the juries had heard Rossello's testimony, if they'd seen Erik's letter detailing the alleged abuse, if they'd had experts explaining the long-term trauma of sexual abuse.
Who knows what they would have decided?
Seriously.
It's impossible to know for sure. And sometimes that new knowledge forces us to re-examine these old cases.
And it's heavy stuff.
It is. It really is.
And speaking of heavy stuff, we have to talk about the family in all of this. It's almost impossible to fathom what they're going through. On one side, you have Milton Anderson, Kitty's brother, who's completely opposed to the idea of these guys getting out of prison. He believes they should stay locked up for the rest of their lives. Some of Kitty's other relatives who are actually supporting the brother's release. They're saying that they believe the abuse claims, they see the impact of that trauma, and they feel like enough time has been served.
It's just such a tragic situation.
And this case isn't just dividing the family. It's become a total political flashpoint. Gascón's recommendation for resentencing has landed him right in the middle of this firestorm. He's up for re-election. And this has become a weapon for both his supporters and his critics. His opponents are hammering him, saying he's weak on crime, that this decision is a slap in the face to victims. But his supporters are pushing back, saying he's courageous,
taking a stand,
for being willing to consider all the angles, for acknowledging the possibility of rehabilitation, for trying to bring some kind of balance to a system that can often feel incredibly rigid. This one case is touching on so many raw nerves in our society.
Like what?
Our fear of crime, our understanding of trauma, our evolving views on justice and punishment. So it's crazy to think that even with Gascón, like, recommending this resentencing, the Menendez brothers, they might not actually walk free. The parole board still has to weigh in, right? And they're going to be looking at everything.
Everything, The
brothers' behavior in prison, the nature of the crime.
Right.
The potential risk they might pose if released.
And, you know, with all the attention on this case,
oh my gosh,
they'll be under a microscope.
Can you imagine that public scrutiny?
Oh, it'll be intense.
And even if they are granted parole, what does life even look like for them after spending over 3 decades behind bars? They went in as practically kids. They've missed out on so much. I mean, how do you even begin to rebuild the life after all that?
The world has changed so much since the early 90s.
Oh my gosh.
Technology, social media. Plus, they'll always carry the weight of this case.
Right, the notoriety, the judgments.
It just seems like an impossibly daunting task.
It would be incredibly challenging. There's no guarantee of success.
It's a long road.
It is this whole case.
Yeah.
It's just a constant reminder of how complex these issues are. It leaves us wrestling with this, like, biggest question of all. Do we believe in second chances? And if so, at what cost? That's the question we're going to leave you with today. Will the Menendez brothers get their second chance?
It's still up in the air.